you very much for that introduction and warm welcome. You'll have to bear with me. My voice has taken this talking over the din in the past couple of days has taken its toll. But it's always a pleasure to participate in these events, and it's a wonderful opportunity to meet so many people and share your experiences and hear your stories and put faces with names on emails and Facebook messages. I appreciate your generosity in sharing those things with you. In fact, yesterday I slipped into line really quickly to get some dinner. I was quite hungry after a sparse breakfast and luncheon. And someone kind of caught me by the elbow there at the door. He was asking me, he had the program in his hand, and he was sort of slapping it, and he said, well, there's something wrong here. Has anyone asked by a show of hands how many people here have actually seen a Sasquatch? I said, well, no, I don't think anyone has done that. He said, well, they need to do that. There's two types of people that come to these things. Those that have seen and they know and they believe, and those that are just kind of curious. He said, which camp do you fall into? And I said, well, I'm actually here to speak. I'm very curious about it, but I haven't seen one myself. He was quite impressed with the bust on the back there, and so he was telling me that he had seen one himself. He was in the former camp, but he was, his experience involved an individual that had much grayer hair. He pointed to his own hair under his baseball cap, and he said, yeah, I saw this thing, and he said, I was out in the woods, and actually I was just zipping up, and I heard him say to me, are you scared? And he said, my hands started to shake, and he said, hell yes, I'm scared. And he goes, now how did he know that? He said, that Sasquatch was half a mile away. And I said, well, how did you know that he knew that you were scared? He said, oh, I'm psychic. And I said, well, then how come you didn't know which camp I was in? So, anyway. When Tom had invited me, I guess I better hold on to this because I do tend to walk. When Tom invited me, he had mentioned some interest in a project that was kind of stewing, and it's still stewing. And you may have seen some of this online and on Facebook, this Project Sasquatch, which is, it'll be more than just entertainment, I hope. It'll be, if it ever develops, it'll be something that will provide an opportunity to kind of dig a little deeper into the stories and get to the bottom of the news items and past historical events. But as I said, it's still stewing, and it remains to be seen whether anything will ever come of that. So I was trying to think of some other things to talk about this afternoon, and I thought I'd emphasize a little more on this theme of the relic hominoid inquiry. As some of you may know, I finally managed to get an online journal launched. This is a scholarly, peer-reviewed journal, and emphasizing publications and reviews and commentaries from academics, with the dual purpose of providing a venue for academics to publish their research, but also in a field or in a circumstance where it sometimes is rather hostile to try to get your work on this subject published in mainstream journals, but yet still have the same standards of publication and peer review. But also in the process as the editor, it allows me to involve individuals who might not otherwise take an active role, who may never submit a paper to such a publication, but they would be willing to write a review of that manuscript, or to write a commentary about a news item or a development and its implications for the things that we're interested in. So with that thought, let's kind of embark it. Now, no one in this room, I'm sure, would question the fact that the wild man archetype is a widespread phenomenon. I wouldn't say universal, because if it were wholly or entirely universal, then one might argue that it was just a manifestation of the human psyche, that there was something about the human experience that required that drew out an expression of this imagery of this uncivilized, hair-covered human vicar that haunted the woods and the mountains. But it's not universal. We don't find peoples who inhabit the Sahara Desert having stories of wild men. We don't have people, in areas where there isn't an ecological basis for such a thing to exist. There's a remarkable correlation with the habitat. But it is very extremely widespread throughout history, and if we go back to even the earliest literary traditions of both Western and Eastern civilizations, Northern cultures, we find that the wild man plays a very prominent role. Hit something of a pinnacle, of a zenith in the 11th through even up to the 15th, 16th centuries in Europe, where wild men were frequently depicted in all sorts of iconography. This is a beautiful inlay on a casket which now resides in a French museum, depicting this classic theme of the abduction of the human female by the wild men. In this case, she had her knight in shining armor arrive in the nick of time to run the beast through and save her from that fate. But also, if you're familiar with the traditions about the Green Man, that are widespread throughout Europe, and little icons of the Green Man are hidden away in various places. If you go into cathedrals, they're often festooned in little nooks and crannies. And the Green Man was sort of the consort of Mother Nature. He was the representation of the verdancy of the forest. And in early depictions, it was this face, this humanoid face peering out through the foliage. In later, much like this, in later depictions, the foliage then took on the actual face itself, or vice versa. The face took on the foliage. It was formed out of leaves and twigs and branches. And in later iterations, still the branches and leaves were issuing out of the mouth, as if the Green Man was the source of this greenery, the verdant wilderness. Well, could that tradition have started off with a vision like this, a wild man, some pre-modern hominin, peering out through the forest canopy at the activities? It reminded me of the depiction of, I just went blank, Kelly, right? Kelly's book showing the Sasquatch kind of peering from around the tree, watching the women grind the corn, interested in the sights and sounds and smells of human activity, but looking sort of through that window from outside. Science eventually came up alongside these folklore traditions, these, the common knowledge of the common folk, and as Linnaeus began to catalog all of nature, and his disciples, his students went out to collect specimens, travelers returned with stories about man-like creatures, and they were readily accepted. It was anticipated, in fact, because as the notion of the great chain of being, this ladder of life, with each link going from the simplest of creation to the most complex, with humanity at the pinnacle, at the acme of creation, it was expected that there would be creatures found that sort of filled the gap. These were the missing links in this great chain of being. Because if creation was divine, it would be perfect in its completeness. And there was obviously, to most European observers, there was an obvious gap, a tremendous gulf between us and other animals they were familiar with, the deer, the cows, the pigs, the four-legged creatures. So when stories of man-like creatures, or anthropomorpha, began to arise, it was, can you all see, am I standing right in the way? It was perfectly accepted. Now, interestingly, there was, you can see here are the anthropomorpha laid out, and now, with 20/20 hindsight, we can see, despite the slight anthropomorphism of some of these depictions, we can see recognizable species. So on the far right is the orangutan. In the center is the chimpanzee. And the walking stick is just an artistic tool to indicate that these creatures were a little bit tipsy on their hind legs. They couldn't really walk like us. And then we have you notice the tail in the third from the right here. That is actually a gelada baboon. It's quite obvious that you can see the little details. Did Tom make off with his pointer, by the way, or is it still up here, Ron? No. May still be here. Let me see. I don't see it. All right, that's all right. Or was it, I wonder if that has a pointer on it. Yep, there we go. Okay. So you can see the tail. You can see there's this little indication right here, almost looks like a little necklace. Well, that's a giveaway because the females of this species have a bare chest, and they have a string of little, or a line of vesicles that fill up with fluid, become quite tumescent during the estrus. Looks like a little glistening pearl necklace there on the neck. So even those details are quite evident. But the face is much more human-like, obviously, than this. But then we have the troglodyte, and Linnaeus placed real significance on this. And Boris Tvorzhnev in Russia used this as a jumping-off point to his thesis that there was another type of humanity, the troglodyte, that was parallel to Homo sapiens. And this was a hirsute creature that was mute, that was nocturnal, and that frequented the remote forested mountains. This example came from Southeast Asia. Well, the scientific community at large simply decided that this was sort of a derogatory depiction of native tribal peoples and to be ignored. That's all the question. So there was no modern primate species that was used as an analogy for that.